The world is your oyster. You can really go anywhere you want and take what you're learning in the people space because it is so, so incredibly valuable.
Welcome to the TroopHR Podcast. I'm your host, Taylor Bradley. Today we're exploring the question that's gaining momentum across the people leadership space. What if the next great CEO isn't a finance or product leader, but your CHRO? I'm joined by Katie Stricker, Executive Advisor and founder of The Potential Equation, who spent years working with senior HR leaders to help them step confidently into broader operational roles. From mindset shifts to business acumen, Katie brings a fresh and practical perspective on what it truly takes for people leaders to claim their place at the top. We first start this episode by asking Katie how she ended up where she is today and what she's learned along this journey so far.
So I've been doing this work in the people space for over a decade now. And I'd say about two and a half years ago, I was in San Francisco. I was meeting up with a good friend of mine who was a CHR at the company that, we had been talking about. She'd been previous CHRO at a few other organizations. And we were just doing a general catch up. I said, how's business, how's work, et cetera. And we're talking, and as she's going, I'm kind of nodding my head. And I finally stop her and I say, do you mind if I just cut in and make an observation? And I said, you're doing the role of the president of a company, right? So what she was really doing was driving strategy. She was partnering with the CEO to take a much broader look at the organization, how it was actually leading in its space or how it wasn't, how it had sort of historically operated, positioned itself from a marketing perspective, and helping shape and craft the future of the business. And along with that, she was going deeper into the business units to do the same thing with those leaders. So with the CFO, with marketing, with product, right? And really talking to them about how they could help drive towards the larger company strategy. And I just couldn't help but make that observation that she was carrying these two huge big roles without really realizing it, right? Helping drive the organization from a much broader perspective, but then also knowing the people and the organization. So we just kind of started talking about that, and she was kind of like, we'll say more. And I just couldn't help myself but just, get really excited. And then the next year she did take on a much larger chief operating role. And so, it just goes to show when she was able to connect the dots on the broader business level, the scope and sort of what she was able to accomplish. What was interesting is after that, again, starting to connect with other CPOs, CHROs, I really noticed something similar, that they were functioning in a very different way. They were so closely connected to the CEO. Not always, right? Sometimes it was very welcome from the CEO. The CEO was like, great, like I want this partnership from you. Others were like, wait a second, you're kind of the people person. You're supposed to be sort of over there, not kind of up in my business. And, there's some tension and interesting connection points there. But repeatedly, I've seen this over and over and over again. And it just made me think, wait a second, why aren't people leaders being considered for this top role? They have the business acumen, they know people, they know leadership, and people is the biggest asset that any company has. We know this. And so it just started getting me thinking of how do we help people leaders who want to be taking on those broader, operational roles or the CEO role. How do we help position them to do that? How do we help them get the skills to do that? And how do we help them level up in a way that's going to get them in the best absolute possible position? Again, to the people who want to do it, right? Not everyone's going to want to do it, but for those who do, how do we give them the tools necessary to do it?
And what I've enjoyed about the description so far is you're really creating almost this Venn diagram. Someone may have a better diagram for me to reference of there's the CHRO, but a lot of skill overlap with both the COO, to be fair, and CDO.
Totally.
If we had to boil it down to, 3 to 5 core traits that you feel that there's a lot of overlap, there's a lot of connection between those two, what would those traits be? You mentioned a few, but I'd like to really highlight those for our CHROs that are listening.
This is going to feel like a tangent, but it's not, so stay with me. There was a Gartner report that said only 31% of CEOs feel like their C-suite teams operate in a cohesive way versus in silos, right? So the number one trait in my view, as the CHRO or CPO, is to be able to zoom out and really become a partner to all pieces of the organization to pull it together in order to get everyone moving forward. So I think having that mindset of being able to zoom out, see the bigger picture, and sort of bring everyone along for the ride, I think that's the number one trait that you have to have in order to move in this direction. So I think that's number one. Number two is just a learner's mindset and curiosity. We all know that CEOs aren't experts in accounting or expert in product positioning, right? They know just enough and then they hire the right people to execute the work and the vision that they set forward. So really understanding parts of the business. This is one thing where I think we can get in our own way, right? As people leaders, people kind of think, well, I have to know everything about marketing. No, you don't, right? Like really focusing on some like core fundamentals, get curious, put on that learner's mindset. That's the biggest thing that you can do. And then I think the third thing is setting a path and charting a sort of connection path with people in your world to support you to that role, right? Finding other CPOs or CHROs to bounce around ideas on how you might move into some of these different positions. And we're talking about the CEO role, and I talk about pipeline. Pipeline, the CEO can be president's role, COO role, chief administration role, et cetera, right? There's a couple different roles that sort of start to get you into that pipeline that we can easily make that connection. To your point, there's such an operational aspect to that role as well. So I would say those are kind of the three core pieces that need to be kind of fundamental to how you think. It's definitely a mindset piece out of the gate. I want to talk about some tangible pieces too. And it's interesting. I've just started working with someone on this. How do you help people in that learner's mindset from a more tangible perspective start to parse out how they can do some of that learning? I've actually worked with some CPOs who come from a finance background, interestingly enough, right? So they do have some of those fundamentals already when it comes to finances and ops, and sort of not forgetting that, there's some history there and some past that you might have that you can really bring forward into thinking about the future of your role within an organization.
That's a great call out of the traits that you've just described are the ones that there's a lot of overlap. As you've helped other people on this journey, before we even get to the pipeline part of it, there's likely self-imposed barriers that people put in their way of, I may have some of these traits, but I don't have X or I don't have Y. What are the most common ones that you see? You mentioned marketing, but are there other ones that folks say, I don't have this, so I can't do that?
P&L knowledge, hands
Mm.
down. Right? People are like, well, I'm not running a revenue org. So like, how can I truly understand the P&L? Right? Like my thinking on that is this is not brain surgery, right? Like what's interesting is this is like very functional things, right? So that is hands down the one I hear the most, that people are kind of like, I'm not close enough to the org P&L. I don't know a P&L well enough. Like certainly they have a P&L to a degree, obviously they have operational budget, et cetera, but that revenue piece, missing for them, and sort of feeling like that feels like a huge gap or a big leap that they have to make. And it's really not, right? It goes back to that learner mindset. I do want to double down on something you just said, because I know we talked about these kind of three pillars of the Venn diagram overlap. Getting out of our own way is the number one trick, right? Sort of like to your point, those limiting beliefs that pop up. How could I ever understand revenue if I've never had to go out and sell something, right? These are all the sort of inner critic voices that show up for us as people leaders. And so thinking about how we turn that around for folks is one of my key objectives, when I'm working with folks one-on-one. So how do you really think about what does that look like for you and how do you want to shift that? And interestingly, over the couple of years that I've been working with folks on this topic in particular, it's interesting how quickly just working on that mindset piece can really make that shift. I was just talking to someone a couple of weeks ago and I paused and I said, a year ago, this was not how you sounded, right? I just want to make sure like we're on the same page, that you're speaking confidently to budgets and P&Ls and understanding, conversations you're having with the other C-suite team members. So just making some of those small shifts can have a huge impact.
And you brought up the mindset. My own personal journey, I'm on CNBC's Workforce Executive Council. And on
Yeah.
that position, it gives me the ability to attend CEO Summit each year. The first year that I went, to be vulnerable with our team here, is I was terrified. These are CEOs that I'm going to be some of the world's largest company, and I'm going to be in the same room with them. What am I doing here? And one of the things that stood out to me almost immediately, they're just normal people. They're just normal people that pursued this. To your point, there's a lot of things that they know a lot. There's a lot of things they learned on the job, and there's still a lot of things they don't know. When we were
Yeah,
talking about AI, for example, I found myself at a table where I had a bunch of CEOs looking at me and learning. And so it's like we're all learning from each other. So I think the mind shift set that I've experienced, call it imposter syndrome, call it whatever, really opened up my eyes to that. The other thing that you're saying that is starting to really resonate with me is even if, because some folks don't want to do a COO, CEO, is that these skill sets are, in my mind, critical for a CHRO anyways. Understanding the
totally.
P&L. We run a program in our organization called How We Make Money, and it's part of our mini MBA series that we've developed. Every manager goes through it, but so does every member of the HR team. A lot of my business partners may know more about a P&L of a particular product than maybe some new managers do.
Totally.
And so these are skill sets that as our listeners are tuning into this episode, you don't even have to pursue that to embrace a lot of these traits. Now,
Yeah.
let's talk a bit about the journey. I've even thought this. I want to go be a COO. I know we're talking about CEOs, but I want to go be a C-suite that's not in HR. We'll put it that way. How do I start the journey of building the profile to be considered for these roles? How do I start to get on that path?
Yeah. The number one rule is to know what matters to that business when it comes to the COO role. So every company is going to be different. So let's just say you're doing it within your current org, right? Go speak to the folks who are going to be interacting with that role the most to find out what's important to them. And hands down, to your point, so many of these skill sets are important to a CPO or a CHRO in general. And so we want to be developing those skills overall, but then taking a fresh look at yourself and say, okay, wait a second. I actually have most of what people are asking for and looking for. Now, how am I actually speaking to it so people understand that I have the skill set? Or what have I done that I haven't actually highlighted that people see it so that I can better position myself? So that's going to be your number one tool. I have a tool I use in a lot of different ways. It's not always for the same thing, but I just call it a 3 column filter, right? So when I look at this role and I think of the core elements that people are wanting in this person who's going to step into this job, the left hand column, what I have nailed. What do I know that I can speak to? What can I highlight? Middle column, there's some shaky stuff that I probably have to clean up a bit and maybe I have to, do a little bit of work. And then you've got the right hand column, which is like, there's one thing that I feel like I really need to kind of capture there, and that's okay. But being able to speak to how you're going to actually capture that skill set is what's important, right? What I see people do is hold themselves back the most when they don't feel like they have 100% of the skill set covered. It doesn't matter. You don't have to have it, but you want to be able to speak to how you're going to fill that gap, right? It could be you're going to hire someone who does that really well, or you're not afraid to be able to step into that because of X, Y, and Z, right? So when you know what's really important to the organization or the person who's hiring, I mean, it's really the same for external. You just have a little bit of an understanding gap, but you can find some of that out in sort of initial conversations or how you might be networking into that business. But that's how you want to go about starting to position yourself for that role. And of course, you have to want to do it, right? Going back to that. So once you kind of take a look at those, what people are looking for, wanting to step into that is key. I know I keep beating that over the head, but it's important to want to do it. So is that helpful? I feel like we need to work together, Taylor. There's like some eagerness here I'm really liking.
Yes, yes. For my CEO that's currently listening, I'm not leaving. But the key thing too is I worked at many startups with oftentimes founder CEOs, is you do have to be aware of what you are also signing up for because
Exactly. Yeah.
it is a different lifestyle. Even CHRO roles are incredibly difficult. I don't want to underplay that. But the work that Jonathan, our founder CEO, puts in is incredible. And
Yeah.
there's a reason for it. And so being cognizant of what you're signing up for. Another thing that I often hear CHROs express interest in, and I want to broaden the aperture a little bit, if I may, is board positions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How does that tie into this discussion?
Well, you're being brought onto a board because of your expertise, right? And also, what that gives you is exposure to other folks who are going to be similar to you in experience, probably similar to you in intensity to some degree, as far as commitment to wanting to add value to that organization via the board seat. And that can only benefit you as far as seeing things differently. I mean, so many people that I know either step into boards and they go, oh, this is great because I'm just seeing how a company operates different from mine. So it's just going to give you added value in terms of perspective and making sure, again, you put on that curiosity mindset to say, okay, what can I learn in this setting from different people who are outside of my organization that's going to give me added perspective. So that's another reason why a board seat is going to be super valuable. And it's a resume builder, right? It just shows that you're sought after in terms of your expertise. People want you there for your opinion and your perspective. And that just shows in general how much you can build a business sort of acumen resume around a lot of different experiences, including your current role or your day-to-day role, and then a board seat, or even like, some other organization you might be involved with in a different level.
When it comes to how do we identify where these openings exist, is it aligning and working with folks like you to help them to say, here are some opportunities that may be available to you? How does that play out and work?
It goes back to what the person is looking for and what they would like as far as their career development and career advancement. Certainly working with, an executive advisor or consultant or coach like myself can be very valuable because we can make that roadmap. We can actually start to chart a path in order to go the direction that you want to go. And going back to, leaning on your broader network as well, right? So who else have you seen do this? Who else have you had conversations with about how they may have done it is super valuable. It's one of the things that I ask people to do out of the gate. It's sort of like, who in your network do you know? Who within the organization have you seen kind of move into different roles that you could learn from? Really valuable exercise. But again, going back to the internal part of it and the mindset piece, really thinking about how you want to commit to getting out of your own way, right? And being able to make it happen. I mean, that's like a number one rule of, professional and personal growth and development.
This all keeps coming back in my mind to when I had a chance to see Bob Iger, and he was talking about his organization, Disney. For those of you not familiar with who Mr. Iger is, CEO, is that he wants folks to be storytellers. And Katie, as you're talking, that seems to be what it keeps coming back to, is being able to position your story, talk about how you're
Yeah.
working towards your being that lifelong learner, closing those gaps, developing a resume that's telling the story that's heading in that direction. Are there other tactical things that come to mind that may not be necessarily business traits per se, like the P&L, but more on the soft skill side that folks should be cognizant about developing or highlighting?
Most of this audience, I believe, are kind of in the people space. And, I heard you say just kind of opening up and being vulnerable here a little bit when you shared some of your stories about that CEO conference that you went to. And when you've gotten to this place of a senior role within HR, people are looking to you for expertise. I know the advice of like, you don't always be the smartest person in the room and you can say you don't know things. And yes, of course, and at the same time, when you are at a certain level, people do need, right, some tangible direction or your point of view and expertise. But getting into that space of vulnerability to say, yeah, I might not understand how we do product market fit here. Like, I would love to know more of that. So, opening up some of that vulnerability. But what I would say to this group who's listening as well is lean into developing people. As you continue to grow in yourself, how do you make sure that you are bringing up a team that will support you when you work into that new role? Because you want to be leaving a legacy that's going to just continue to prop up the people space in such an excellent way. And so don't forget about that, right? As you are moving into a potentially different sort of function, make sure to leave that legacy. Make sure you're not forgetting to develop your people. And, you're going to need their support, right? When you become the COO or the CEO or the president or, whatever. So don't let that go. So there isn't vulnerability about opening up around what you need to learn. And we all know, some of the most inspirational CEOs that we see, they are vulnerable. They do open up and say, hey, this is hard for me, or hey, I had a rough go at this, or, I've been there too, right? Like we know that. So we don't want to lose that piece of us when it comes to the people side, but not forgetting your team is definitely something that we want to make sure is, stays intact. And like I said, leaves that legacy to support you when you move into that new role.
And in my experience supporting CEOs, it can be a very lonely job for them. And the CHRO is often the only partner that they can feel safe to come to and be vulnerable with. So
Absolutely.
as listeners, leverage those relationships that you already have and ask them, what is your role like?
Yeah.
If that's something you're interested in, pursue that with the COO or CEO. So, two more questions for you as we come into the landing here. Many of our listeners are senior executives or senior leaders in HR, but we also have a subset of folks that are emerging in their roles and in their careers. And so, out of all the experience you have, what advice would you give to someone that's still on that emerging path in their career in HR?
I mean, first of all, I love that population. It's my favorite because they're the most eager. They are hungry for information. They love to learn. And so, in a lot of ways, what I would say in terms of advice is like the world is your oyster, for lack of better. I know that might sound corny, but really think about you're in a great space and how do you think about people leadership from your own point of view and develop that if this is the path that you want to continue to take. And know that if you kind of go, you know what, I'd be curious to take a little spin on marketing, that you can come back to this role, right? So, like, great, like, go learn. And if you want to come back, excellent as well. But the people space is the most important part of a business because you only have a business when you have people to deliver a really great product. You have to have a great product, but if you don't have the right people to deliver it, etc. We all know that there's opportunity for failure, right? So that's what I would say to the emerging group, right? Like the world is your oyster. You can really go anywhere you want and, take what you're learning in the people space because it is so, so incredibly valuable. And whether you continue to stay in the HR space, get curious about what you want to learn and how you want to grow and where you might want to stay. I was having this conversation with someone recently, actually, someone I've worked with for a very long time. And they were saying they've seen a trend where people have kind of come up and they're sort of emerging to your point. They find their kind of corner within the HR team and they're kind of like, I love it here. I don't want to go beyond this piece. And that's great. Once you know that, that's awesome. And also you might not want to. So just know that you can break out or, do different things if you would like. So, and stay hungry and stay eager and just learn, learn, learn. That's all I would say.
I love the point that you mentioned of just go try it. There was a CEO that was coaching me through a career pivot decision, and I had the opportunity to come where I am today, start up and lead the people organization, or go to a massive company that delivers packages in 2 days. But his advice to me was those types of companies will always be there. You can always go and get that role. Try something different. I think the same applies to folks. Go try some
Yeah.
of these new roles. If you don't like them, HR will always be there. There's typically
Yeah.
always opportunities for that. Final question, the easiest. If folks want to connect with you and learn more about your journey and how you help professionals, how can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can reach out to me at my email, Katie, so Katie, at thepotentialequation.com. You can also visit the website, thepotentialequation.com. Would love to obviously connect with anyone in the group. That's the easiest way to find me. And obviously I'm on LinkedIn as well. So Katie Stricker is my full name. So thanks, Taylor. I really appreciate it.
Katie, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thank you for listening to this episode of the TroopHR Podcast. If you've liked this episode, we would encourage you to like and subscribe. If you would like to learn more about the TroopHR community, you can reach out to troophr.com. In the meantime, keep living the dream.